Thank you, Full Circle. It's really, really nice to be here, as always. It's always such a remarkable group of human beings who gather here. And the four of us were really excited not to speak at you, but to speak with you in a conversation on peace at this festival of ideas, the theme of which this year is hope. And we're pretty sure that in light of the world situation, a lot of us, a lot of the time, don't know how to tap into that hope and don't know how to see the light in situations that are seemingly not only violent and horrible, but that seem intractable and that seem to be going on and on and on. And for which we sometimes don't feel like we have the tools and the wherewithal to do anything. I know I feel very often that there's nothing I can bring to help peace in places that are either far away or even in our immediate environment. And holding conversations about peace is not something easy, and many of us don't go out of our proverbial comfort zone to reach into conversations about the lives of other people. So, what we are not here to do is to be all gloom and doom and depressed, even though we're together, and we can be comforted by being together. What we are here to do is to speak about peace and speak about some of the things that we feel work to make peace really take hold. So we want to hear what brought you here. What about peace? What about hope is bringing you to this conversation on peace today? And feel free to introduce yourself. We're in a safe space here. We're not in complete anonymity, but we are in togetherness. So share with us why you're here if you want to. Joanna's here because she wanted to eat. Yeah, we understand why Joanna's here. All right.
Which is a good reason.
A very good reason.
I mean,
You can't have peace without food in your tummy. That's for sure. That's for sure. What's brought you here?
Togetherness, I think in this moment in time, it's very important, soothing and inspiring to take the time this moment to be together. Yeah. And curiosity and to see what everyone can bring into the peace table.
Great. What's your name?
Sorry, I'm Cécile.
Hi, Cécile.
I'm Emily. Yes, I came here to as a contrast to what's going on in our life most of the time with the bad news and the overwhelming fear and disruption that's all around us.
Yep.
A safe haven away from all of that for a few hours.
Togetherness and safe haven. Any other reasons? Joanna?
Joanna, the woman with the food. I think we're given a view of the world so often that means war and conflict and violence is inevitable, that it's the only way somehow. And I deeply disagree with that. But I think we need to be together to imagine the alternatives and to see how they're possible without being overwhelmed by that. And to see the paths that can help us reject that idea of the world and of humanity and embrace another one that's grounded in love and curiosity and belonging.
Okay, let's do this.
Yes! Yes!
So I hope that you're going to tell us.
We're going
How was
to.
that path?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. We have absolutely all the answers. You're right. All right. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Let's start us off. How about we start with Simone, and then Ahmed, and then Antonia, and then Sandra. Just a couple minutes.
A brief introduction.
A brief introduction. Who you are, your work in peace building, your thoughts. In a couple of seconds.
My name is Simone Susskind. My background is the Jewish community here in Belgium, where I have fought in between for peace between Palestinians and Israelis when I was a leader in the Jewish community, and also the role of women in. It's not my telephone.
The role of busy women.
No. Sorry.
Can I ask a question? Could the person speaking maybe stand up? Because
You don't hear.
Sorry.
very loud, but then we need to change the mic.
Somebody works in communications.
I'm not sure it's working. No.
No, it's not working.
It's for him, it's not for us. Okay. So, my name is Simone Susskind. I have been an activist for peace coming from the Jewish community since many, many years, because I was convinced when I was a very young student, like you, that there is no future for the state of Israel if there is not a Palestinian state beside Israel. So this was the main line of thinking that was an important part of my activism, and also during all these processes, trying to figure out and to show that women have a role to play in building a peace. Not only Israel-Palestine, I worked on the Euro-Mediterranean level, and also because we started at some point with women, Palestinian and Israeli women, whom we brought here during the first Intifada, and it led to many years of cooperation with all the difficulties of a peace process that was derailing before and mainly after the Oslo Agreement. And so but also the idea was how can women share their experience in trying to work on these issues. So we worked with women from former Yugoslavia, and also what I did all the time is to say, okay, these Palestinian and Israeli women can tell about their experience in trying to get out of a very difficult conflict. For women of former Yugoslavia, which we did, and also for women in Cyprus, which we did too. This is mainly the road, and since many years I left the Jewish organization that I was chairing. I established my own NGO called Actions in the Mediterranean, and we, just to tell on very recent issues, I was looking at what was happening here when there is a war in Gaza in 2014, because there have been many wars. And I was thinking, it's exploding here. It's exploding here because of the impact. It's exploding all over the world. And what happened on 7th of October, I'll come back on it later, had such a huge impact in regard of what happened in the previous wars between Israel and Gaza. So I thought that what is important is to work with young people in Brussels to show them that it's more complex than what they believe. And so since 2014, we have worked with high school kids 1 year before the end of the lycée. Each year we have done 7 editions of this program. I'll come back if you ask questions, because it's an introduction. And also working with teachers, because teachers don't know how to answer to the questions of their students when there is a war in the Middle East, when there is an Islamist attempt. In a nutshell, and the program is called Israel-Palestine for a Better Understanding.
Yes.
Thank you, Simone. Ahmed.
Oh, should I go? All right. I hope you don't mind. I will not stand up. Is that all right? Can you see me?
As long as you speak loudly, it's
Okay, I'll try to speak louder. Perhaps that's less anxiety-inducing. So I'm Amr Abdo. My background is the Middle East. I am originally from Egypt. I've been living here for many years, 10 years now. And to be frank, I'm peace builder by chance. I finished my studies in Egypt as a mechanical engineer, and then I joined the Arab Spring because we were also very hopeful and we thought we will change the whole Middle East and after the universe, starting the street. But this dream was shattered quite quickly. Relatively quickly, let's say. Me and my comrades, let's say, we were persecuted. I think from my generation, there's hardly anyone who was involved in Arab Spring who still reside and work in Egypt for various reasons. But then the second best scenario for me was to work on conflict resolution and peace building. So that's what I've been doing. I've worked on different files in Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Libya. Unfortunately, the impact or the success story have been very scarce, which is one thing that practitioners in this sector have to grapple with, because despite efforts, end of the day, you don't necessarily see positive impacts at all cases. Sometimes you have changed some social norms, etc. So that gives you some hope. But in the grand scheme of things, unfortunately, the horizon is less bright than we actually hope. The second point on the dilemma of practitioner or peace builder is like you are torn apart between your conviction that certain conflicts should end by instituting a certain level of justice and revolutionary ideas. At the same time, the core of mediation or peace building is optimism and believing in your worst enemies, perhaps. So that is something on top of the identity issues that we are grappling with. That's another thing that practitioners have to struggle with. Having said that, I have also done some work on the humanitarian side of things, because unfortunately also back home, when you speak as an international organization, there's even a certain word that if you go to Yemen or go to Iraq, you are labeled as munazzamat, which means organization, and it's not necessarily always very positive connotation. So I joined Oxfam Novib in 2021, but also from the view of integrating the perspective of conflict resolution into the humanitarian work. Not very new, but it's relatively new, is the conflict sensitivity concept, which tries to look at addressing the root causes of violent conflict as the underlying cause also of most of the problem, the extreme poverty, inequality, even environmental degradation. So I became a firm believer in the idea of conflict transformation. So I hope when we get some dose of hopeful and bright idea, we can come back to looking at peace from the perspective of conflict. And conflict is not necessarily the violent, negative conflict. And I think it's very hard to be here in Brussels with a group of practitioners of peace building and people who are clearly impacted by what's going on in our surroundings, and not talk about places like Palestine and Israel, Sudan and Congo. Because what's happening there are also symptoms of the failure of the greater system of things that is failing to make us fulfilled and also destroying the planet. So I look at peace as harmony between people, but also harmony between people and nature. And I hope we will have time to start a conversation on these points soon.
Thanks,
Over
Emma.
to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I'm going to try sitting down as well, if that's okay, and just indicate if you can't hear. So I'm Antonia, and I'm thrilled to be here today because, well, for many reasons, and it's a great privilege, and it's a privilege to be a part of a conversation with you and with these three very special people. And we have such different journeys that may be a point of interest for you, because my journey into a career basically and a personal conviction around dialogue and collaboration started, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I have to admit it, from I think what is now commonly described as a sort of, it was an adolescent white saviour complex. I mean, I grew up privileged and felt bad about that, so I thought I should go and do something good, and so I got into humanitarian work that way. Only the humanitarian work and the places that I went to slapped me in the face, and I started to see things very differently. So from places like Timor-Leste, about almost not quite as far from here as anywhere could be, but pretty far away, Afghanistan, Cambodia, and what I learned there from trying to pay attention to where I was and talking and listening to people was obviously many things about the interconnectedness of things and about people's dignity and their own aspirations, but also about this international system that had grown up post the great wars of the last century, to try and give order and sense and a helping hand to those values that seemed and still seem and are universal around peace and justice and equality. So this little path of mine has traversed a period in time in which these three brilliant and distinguished and very different people have also been involved, which has been the professionalization of something called peace building, as if somehow there wasn't peace building going on ever since humanity has existed. But this is something, I think this could be something interesting for us to dig into today, because I think some of the elements of hope that I have learned and seen in some of the work that I've done, and I have also in a very small and insignificant way compared to Simone, but also been very involved in this question of women's participation in peace building, because it might not surprise you to learn that the percentage of women in the world population is not reflected by the percentage of women in mediation roles, negotiation roles, etc. Even now, even despite all of the efforts that are made. But what you learn coming close to these processes is that there are any number of brilliant ideas about how to resolve a certain situation. The creativity of people is incredible in terms of inventing ways to get people to talk to each other. You know, we have lots of technical terms like confidence building measures and trust building measures, and there are books and journals all about what those look like, and we can tell you, those of you that aren't already very aware, what some of those things are. So there's like a whole toolkit, I think, of things that have now been identified, labelled, studied, brought forward as best practice, but even that is not always enough. And so, I mean, I come here today to be part of this conversation because, in a way, I want the professional side of peace building to be connected to the hope and the energy of activism again. I also feel as I get older, because I've been doing this for about a quarter of a century, and I'm now 50, how old am I? 52.
I don't know.
I'm 52. I never remember, like 50, but I'm 52. And I now see the benefit of bringing into conversations like this poetry, literature, philosophy, art. I mean, they have a meaningful role to play. And it's still very difficult to talk about that in the political conflict resolution sphere. it's difficult to talk about emotions and psychology in the political conflict resolution sphere, and yet that is actually the daily stuff of our life and of the people who are living in conflict. So, I hope that in this conversation today we can maybe unearth some of those reasons for hope, but also stay connected to the reality. And I will just finish with one fact for you, which is that if you study the history of armed conflict over time, the most sustainably held resolutions are achieved through negotiated settlement. They are not achieved through military means. It's a thing to remember as we go into this conversation. I'm not saying a negotiated settlement equals peace, but it's just a thing to remember. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm okay with standing up if you... it's all right. Thanks. So I'm Sandra Melone, and I have been working in peace building for 30 years, and there are so many things which resonate from what Simone, Ahmed, and Antonia have just said that I'm going to just jump from a little bit, just weaving it with what I've done. So the first thing is that I started, the first job, I mean, like many people, you first start, you don't know what you want to do when you're 20-something, you got to pay the rent, you go get a job, so insurance company, blah, blah. And then I have my first experience, like aha moment, at Amnesty International, where I was volunteering. And at Amnesty International, which, as you know, is a remarkable human rights organization, we were very much, human rights activists getting, telling the Rwandan government they're doing the bad thing, telling the Chinese government they're doing the bad thing, and we were saying this the other day, believe me, if I'm in jail, I want amnesty on my case. Amazing. Except what I noticed is that the more you go like this at the bad guy, I'm being a bit simplistic here, the more the doors close. So yeah, you'll have that one prisoner released, but you ain't gonna get peace in that country because they get entrenched. So somehow by destiny, while I was working in the field of human rights, I met somebody who worked in the field of peace building, which, as Antonia said, as a field of where you have professional jobs, etc., it's very recent. It's literally 30 years old. I mean, it's just yesterday. And I meet this guy who started this organization called Search for Common Ground, and it just clicked that the thing about peace and the thing about peace building is that it has to be inclusive. It's not just has to be negotiated, but it has to take into account the things that you were talking about, which are the fears, the needs, the aspirations, the desires of the population in its totality, not just of the party who is holding the power or leading the violence. And that means talking to the bad guys. And that means that the politics around the world suck because you decide who's good and who's bad and you don't engage all of them in... They're part of the problem, they're part of the violence, they're part of the conflict that's unresolved, but you don't involve them in the resolution of it. Nor do you involve the children, nor do you involve the women. Nobody's ever asked them, what they want to do. Anyway, so became completely in love with the peace-building process, which is very much a long-term process, which is a very much 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, as you've mentioned, and which has as a core principle the idea that you don't take the side of a party, you don't take the side of a person, you take the side of a process which has to involve all parties. And I've had the privilege of being able to work across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia for these three decades. And many of the things that actually work are non-frontal, non-confrontational ways in which to bring groups together. You mentioned it, Antonia. How you do through culture and art and daily activity and humanitarian aid and trips together and all of these things. Because the hope is, and the fact is that, I'm going to give you a bullshit statistic, but 99% of the world population all the time, everywhere, only wants peace. They don't want other people's children killed. They don't want their children killed. It's just, I've seen that everywhere. Every country that we've mentioned here, people actually want peace. I can guarantee you that from experience, and you know that from your own experience. The problem is, the second you have one person who throws a grenade somewhere, literally or figuratively, then that takes like a virus. But what we have seen in so many conflict zones across the world is that actually there is the virus of peace that you can ignite. But doing that involves so many different things. And we'll talk about some of them. But anyway, that's a little bit about who I am. And thank you for listening to that. What we thought we would do now is that we really open this up to a conversation. And you have to really get, please, in the depths of your soul and your mind, because actually conflict is not only normal, but the escalation to violent conflict can be prevented. But also, there are literally no stupid things to say when you think about what some of the possibilities for peace are. So please feel really comfortable and feel really at ease to just make whatever comments, ask whatever questions, say how you're feeling. The world is very heavy these days, and we haven't even mentioned Ukraine, but there's Ukraine too, and that's on our doorsteps. And now Israel, Palestine is also on our doorsteps because there are ramifications that we're feeling everywhere, in the schools, in the churches, in the synagogues, in the mosques, and everything, in the streets. And so, let's talk. And nice to see some friends over there too. Yeah, hi. So, please, what are some of your thoughts or feelings or questions that you'd like to bring? Please, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Maggie. I come to Full Circle fairly often. One thing that was going through my mind as we were talking, and maybe I'm taking a different direction than people would want to take, but I just wanted to raise a question about the economic forces. Either behind the battles for territory, natural resources, drugs, and also the economic driver of the industry that makes weapons, that then get used in hot battles, hot wars that are going on, but then when ex-Yugoslavia went quiet, those weapons have found their way into many places, including the streets of Stockholm or Brussels or whatever, or Antwerp, where you have gangs fighting drug battles. So it's kind of, I know the focus of the discussion now here is about how we move towards peace, and we do that in a positive way. But at the same time, there is this huge economic force operating in many different ways to make sure there are lots of weapons available anywhere, anytime, for any purpose that anybody wants them. And I think that's obviously part of the picture as well, but it's not, it's a very ugly part of the picture.
Real de chez real. Shall we take a couple different things and then kind of go into and get a tap for, thank you for that important question on some of the root causes of conflict. Please.
My name is Ahmed. I had a question maybe specifically for Simone, but the other one can also elaborate. It's on hope. You already mentioned what's going on in the Middle East. Two sides who are getting more and more triangled in their own camps. So my question to you is, where do you find hope? Where do you see these lights of hope that also keep you going, doing your activities every day? Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else right now?
Yeah, maybe. So maybe in French we say it's probably tarte à la crème comment, but I'm allowed to make it anyway. When we talk about peace, of course, and more, and we started this conversation with a meditation today. So, in your experience, I know that so it's so important to be at peace with yourself, right? And that's a long life process. But I know that some initiative exists already. One friend of mine, she created something which is called inner peacekeeping or something like that. She's implemented that in Afghanistan, in pretty much all very hot conflict zone. Do you have any experience on this? Do you have any suggestion to scale up that kind of initiative? So I'm trying to toward opens and concrete stuff, and which relates to inner peace, which is a prerequisite, I think. Stuff.
So that is so far from tarte à la crème that it's beyond belief. It's really like
with yourself.
I mean, really. Yeah, peace begins with me. Yeah, please. All right, start.
Maybe I'll answer to your. Can I stay seated? Okay. No. You stood up and I stood up too. Listen. I would say that until the 7th of October, I was answering to people who were asking me, how can you remain hopeful and optimistic when you see the situation between Israel and Palestine? So my first answer was that, yes, I am a desperate optimist. Now, this is why I am going on, okay? What I have done during all this period, and probably I'm going to do it again, is I thought all the time that it's important to bring those voices from the civil society in Palestine and in Israel who are simply trying together or separately to fight for human rights, a peaceful solution of the conflict, women's rights, and when they work together, trying to say that we need to work together. I'll give a few examples. And these organizations are still going on now. This is amazing. So, because what happened on the 7th of October was so immense, so the whole world is shivering when we look at what's happening actually in Gaza, but when we look at what happened on the 7th of October, which was a terrorist attack that I don't want to get into details. I just read an article which I find very important about inquiries that have started immediately after the 7th of October on rape of women who were raped, violently raped, and it was filmed by the guys who were raping these women, and they found also on. So it's awful, and the hostages, babies, and so on. But so I want to stress, and I'm always stressing and saying and doing, we need to show these people, these associations, which fight for another approach of this conflict. I'll give one example. When we went with high school kids exactly 1 year ago to Israel and Palestine, we took them to the West Bank. It was the period of the olive picking. And we took them to a village where people, Palestinian people, were trying to pick their olives while there were settlers and where there was the army who was doing everything in order to not allow them to do this. But we didn't do it alone. We went with an Israeli NGO of Rabbis for Human Rights who consistently invite Israelis to come and help for picking olives and bringing a little bit of a protection for the Palestinian farmers. So this is one example, and they are still going on. And so I believe that civil society organizations are essential within the society, and also to expose what's happening outside. Now the polarization is such that it's nearly a miracle that it's going on. So, but this is the little light in the, for instance, now on a political aspect, there is an association of Israelis and Palestinians who work together in order to try to figure out, to have a vision of how the future could look like. They are still doing it. They have a vision, and I'll say it very briefly. They say, okay, when you ask a Palestinian what's Palestine, he would say from the sea to the river. When you ask an Israeli what's Eretz Israel, he would say from the sea to the river. So their approach, their vision is not based on separation, walls and all the military and so on. Their vision is based on coexistence. So they understand very clearly that Israelis will never give up to having their own state, where they are a majority, but their own state. Mm-hmm. And Palestinians need to pass through a state of having their own state. So what they envision, it's two states on the borders of 67, recognized international borders, with open borders, everybody can circulate. Settlers who would like to remain in the state of Palestine would be allowed to, but they would need to abide to the laws of Palestine, but they would remain a citizen of Israel and vote for the parliament in Israel. Palestinians who would like to come within Israel would be residents in Israel, but would be citizens of Palestine, okay? And Jerusalem would be a shared capital. I've worked for a shared capital with women, by the way. In 96, 97, we organized a huge event on this, under this title. This association, for instance, they are not dead. They are still working together. They know that they have to overcome, to pass through this. But these are rays of hope that we need to, in Europe, in the States, that we need to give their voice to be listened and heard. Mm-hmm. So this is what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Maybe Ahmed, either economic resources, defense, etc., and or hope, and or peace begins with me. Everything you want on those three.
Yeah, we'd have loved to choose the creme one, but maybe I will leave that for you, Sandra. And I think hope was covered beautifully by you, so perhaps I will just take on the war economy, and maybe I will look at it from the perspective of Yemen, for instance, worst humanitarian crisis until recently. And
about which nobody talks anymore.
Yeah, that's the reality of
with
of
Sudan, Eastern Congo,
world. And yet, people are still profiting from the war, and hence the war carries on. And community are impoverished, but at the same time, those who raised to prominence at the beginning of the war became like billionaires and investing outside and importing more, and even the drug trafficking or producing drugs became also another source of wealth. But that takes us back to the system that enable the flourishing of those profits. You know, the war economy, or the export of military weapons, which manifest itself in genocides and ethnic cleansing happening across the world, basically, is one symptom of this system that is built on overexploitation and capitalism and failure of decolonization, perhaps. So I'm not, perhaps when we were talking about peace and the root causes of violent conflict, maybe we haven't mentioned that, but implicitly it's included in the system that perpetuate those kind of violent conflicts. And And again, perhaps, I will take the UK as an example, with the biggest producer of weapons that are being used in Gaza. And actually, they market the weapons by saying, okay, our drones are so effective, they have been tested on Gaza, on all the wars of the past decades. This exists in democratic countries, such as the UK, perhaps Germany, some countries.
France, the US. I mean, it's like.
Unfortunately, also here there are some weapon manufacturer. So I think it's a moment of reckoning where we want to go. I mean, there are now more initiative to take actions and to mobilize in different ways, either for human rights, either for ending conflict, either for just getting the weapon manufacturer out of this system of production for the profit of us all, also because those are also the worst polluter for climate. So it's this whole vicious circle. Unfortunately, some people are getting elected because they are using the profits that is siphoned off from this militarization of our universe, and then they perpetuate those kind of conflict, and then those weapons makes its own way to, as you said, either Yugoslavia or to gangs or Syria. We're not talking also about Syria now anymore. It is this kind of, unfortunately, an organic system of production and reproduction of violence and ethnic cleansing for an overexploitation of resources. That's definitely one of the main underlying causes that conflict transformation aims to address, the structures and the attitudes, the social norms that perhaps look the other side on those kind of things. But most of the time we only focus, unfortunately, on the behavior, which includes just ending direct violence and clashes. But if we take the holistic approach of addressing all those different drivers and underlying causes, this is the hope, and the transformation is still ambition, perhaps far-fetched ambition for now. That's the only way forward to avert a crisis that will not spare any of us. I forgot what other point I wanted to say, so perhaps I will leave it here.
You said a lot of good stuff, so we're good. You can always chime in later when you remember. You're getting to be middle-aged. That's what's happening to you.
Yeah.
I forgot the next thing. Okay, it's good.
I have a couple of things to pick up on there, so I will maybe just to pick up further on some of those points, because Mahi, what you raised, I mean, it's not off topic at all, and I guess I wanted to say two things. One on the kind of mechanics of how peace building and making is constructed, and then another on the role of civil society and what civil society means, that Simone mentioned. So I think one of the things that's been really good about the development of practice in peacemaking and peace building is that we've grown a much more subtle awareness of the analysis that you need to do to understand what Ahmed was referring to as the root causes of conflict. It doesn't mean you can grapple with all the elements of them, but I think it's these questions of what are the greater drivers of conflict, whether it is the way the world economy is constructed, or the forces of the outflow, or the reactions to colonization and decolonization. I mean, I think these are much more clearly addressed now, in at least in analysis and understanding amongst those working on it, which is a step forward. The same way in when you're in therapy, that you learn that labeling something for what it is a first step in understanding it. So that links to my second point, which is around the fact that I think we can genuinely take hope in civil society, and to some extent, I mean, sometimes also, in parliaments and voters themselves, who are often, you could describe as being part of civil society. And the reason I say this is that it is just incredible wherever you go. You will find somebody that's, for example, been working for years on monitoring the flow of small arms in a country like Colombia. You will find a civil society organisation, a research institute that has been doing that. You will find somebody that can tell you exactly where to find all the unexploded ordnance that remains on the plains in Laos from the end of the Vietnam War, it's at the top of my mind because, of course, with the death of Kissinger, maybe that was where your question came from. I mean, we've been confronted with the storytelling about this very realpolitik approach to the world. But I mean, I remember in Cambodia when I was working there in the mid-90s, first coming across Global Witness, there were people who were checking out what was happening in the Cambodian teak forests. So this is one thing. The other thing is that, so you will find everywhere, you will find people who are watching, paying attention and trying to hold to account. Unfortunately, what you will find everywhere as well is people like that being imprisoned and being killed. That tells you they're probably onto something. So pay attention, like when environmental and human rights defenders come under attack, it means that they've touched on the truth. And the truth is, that is what counts. And I think for all of us, in the end, that's what we hold on to. And it's true, we don't have vision, we don't have much experience of these kinds of practices and behaviors making it to the level of being the organizing principle for a society, but if it exists amongst so many people, I mean, if Israeli and Palestinian women can still be having this conversation with Simone today, I mean, what amazes me is that world leaders don't go and kind of bow down in front of them and say, how do you do it? How do you do it? That's amazing. How do you do it? Well, because it's possible. So, I mean, I think that's why so many people with these kind of convictions end up more in civil society, because in fact there is space to have these conversations, and that tells us, I think, that our institutions, the institutions we have, are not fit for purpose. And you will also find many civil society organisations who've got lots to tell you about, how to reform the UN, or the institutions of the EU, or our own governments, for example. So that is, I mean, for me, that's a very important source of hope.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, just jumping from everything the three of you have said, there are a couple things. One is, I think that we have a role to play, if we want to, in holding our governments, whom we vote in, it's with our taxpayer money that this stuff is happening. That the arms are, it's just like, and so if one feels up to it, I think that the speaking to, the writing to, the voting on, the mobilizing within our own communities in our supposedly democratic countries is really important. And actually, it's hopeful, because when and if we do, things can change. I really do believe that. I just see that a lot of people give up hope that what they can do is nothing. And I don't believe that. I've seen it shift. I know that you can, but it just takes some mobilizing, and there are networks everywhere into which we can tap and just, call our leadership to account. What is this bullshit? Like, how can you be sending arms across Africa, across the Middle East, to Ukraine? Your only answer to Ukraine and to Russia is more arms, more arms, more arms. What? That is not the answer, not more arms. I mean, it's just, and there's not anyway. So I think that happens. I see it on a daily basis. In the last 2 years, year and a half, I've been working with women's groups. I'm just going from the civil society organizations to specific groups in society across the world that have me very, very hopeful. And that's women's groups and youth. Super amazing youth groups who are just like, wait a minute, we have no alternative. we have to shift the way in which our societies are engaging. And if I just give you an example of the Sahel, so there are 5 countries in the Sahel, Chad, Niger, Mauritania, Mali, and Burkina Faso. They have the lowest GDP in the world, with Niger literally the lowest. They have the highest population growth rate. Each woman in Niger in 2022 had 7 children alive. Okay, you understand what that means in terms of the number. Bon. 7, okay. So, lowest GDP, highest population growth. When you go to a place like Niger or Chad, you literally see the desert coming down year to year. Like, I've seen it. You go, you look, but there was a village here, and now it's the desert. Okay. No job opportunities. All right. Now, I'm not going down the road of how depressing that is and scary, because you also know about all the terrorist movements and all of the governments from the Gulf. We're talking about our democratic states, but hello, the Gulf and everything else, funding arms and Islamist movements and other movements, etc. It's like the perfect storm in like the most patriarchal, violent, gender-based violent societies in the world, like across the Sahel. And every day, there are these amazing people who get up and say, and what alternative do we have? We're going to give up? No! We get up and we say, no, it's the 16 days campaign, orange the world, stop violence based on gender. Of course we're going to get up, and of course we're going to tell our governments, and of course we're going to talk to the men around us, and of course we're going to try to raise our sons and daughters differently. So, all right. And the last thing that gives me hope is, and as you were saying, if they can do it, gosh, right? And maybe I can reach out in my own environment, because anybody you speak to in those places says that one of the truest truism is that unless you can resource yourself and you do the burnout thing, if you will, and avoid the burnout thing, you can't be a really long-term active part of building. So, peace also begins with me, but it's not just about the burnout. It's truly believing that regardless of your opinion and regardless of your actions, that I believe that you are a worthwhile human being somewhere, and that peace has to happen with you. If you don't believe that, you can't bring that into the world. And it's a muscle. Building peace is a muscle. You practice it over time. And one of the things peace builders in the room, peace builders here, peace builders around the world bring, and just decent human beings. You don't have to be labeled a peace builder. Some people are just really nice human beings. And when you can provide settings in which there is hope, because that's the biggest thing, when you're in violent conflict, intractable situations, you're starving, you're scared, your sister got raped. When you're in those situations, the last thing you see is hope, right? All you see is darkness. And if there's anybody anywhere in places, whether it's a block from here, there's despair a block from here. It's not like there's despair with people in the room. You can bring hope and peace and kindness and light to anybody at any time. And I know that it catches like fire, and it's good fire. So anyway, I just wanted to bring those things. And I think, last but not least, for my part at least on this, I'm actually super hopeful about the damn internet, because it's used in all these crazy, irresponsible, violent ways. We see it being used in unbelievably useful ways for dialogue, for bringing people together, for putting out the truth. But there has to be, of course, leadership, etc., on how one does it. But even if you look at the isolation that people had during confinement, etc., and you see how one can use the internet to bring people together so they at least belong to a humanity that's not just their loneliness, I mean, honestly, I think this domain, for people who are in IT and artificial intelligence, etc., and there's one at the back of the room, you still there, Lydia? Artificial intelligence for peace building, I mean, the opportunities are immense. So,
Can I make some comments?
Yeah.
I agree in principle with everything you said, but I would like to make some specific comments.
Please.
Okay. In 2011, and again in 2019, when there was the Arab Spring, who was leading the Arab Spring? Women and young people. Okay. The last emanation of the Arab Spring, Tunisia, has fallen again into dictatorship. People are afraid to speak. People are afraid to express themselves, and it's becoming more and more harsh. Don't speak about Egypt.
Yeah.
What kind of freedom of speech, what kind of expression you can have when everything is controlled, and even more controlled with the new technologies? And so let's speak about Sudan. Look, I'm not going to give you all the examples, but it's a tragedy. Okay, it's a tragedy that I don't know, and what happens with all those people who try to fight and to express themselves? Either they're in jail or they had to escape, and they are here. Okay, so we need to confront reality also. I'm not going to speak about Sahel because I'm not an expert, but I know that there you have military coup, no freedom of expression. So we agree on this. But I want to say one word about Ukraine. I'm happy that we give arms to the Ukrainians, because if we wouldn't have given arms to them, okay, they would have been crushed by Russia, and they would be, and Russia would be they are already at our borders. So I want to correct a little bit of what you said. Okay, so in the Middle East, Israel-Palestine, we have a conflict that is a conflict that opposes two people for the same land. Okay? I agree that the only opportunity, the only possibility to get to a solution is a negotiation between the representatives of those two people. They are not there for the moment, right, on the one side and on the other side. So Hamas is not an interlocutor. The Palestinian Authority is totally corrupt, totally unable to act. And we know what is happening within Israel, okay? I can't, because at some point, it's not only civil society. It's representatives, leaders that have to negotiate a peace agreement, okay? So I believe civil society, we have to support civil society initiatives, because still they are there, and we have to support them in trying to look with a vision on the future. But for leaders, there are two things. We need to have a new generation there, on both sides, on each side. A new generation. The same happens in Egypt, in Tunisia also. A new generation, and we need to have real support, not only interest and so on, a real support from the international community. If it does, and support, it's also bâton et carotte. To Israel, they need to say, you did this. You know, there was even an idea floating in the United States, Biden, I don't know, to say, okay, we all those settlers, violent settlers, they will not get visa to come to the United States. We should say the same in Europe. They shouldn't have the right to come to Europe. So there are things that are not only symbolic, but that are important. We need to think, and here civil society can bring creative ideas to our leaders in order to tell them, you should do such things, you should be consistent. You know, and you have seen when our Belgian Prime Minister and the Spanish Prime Minister went to Israel and to Palestine and then to Rafah at the border. Yeah. They utter very harsh criticisms about Hamas attack, And also they said, but we cannot allow that more thousands of people, civilians, will be killed in Gaza. They were attacked by the Israeli government. And the last element of it is this Spain, Israel called back its ambassador to back, and the Spanish. So there are things that are important. We have fought for it's symbolic, but it's important, for the recognition of the state of Palestine. Some European countries historically have recognized Palestine. Spain is ready to do it. We need Belgium to do it. This is what we need to do to put together civil society and governments and leadership.
Absolument.
Could I say something? And thank you so much for that, Simone. But I wanted to say something about leadership, because I mean you're absolutely right. Those who are voted in have a responsibility to exercise their power according to international law, and we hope some shared sense of morals and ethics. But it does seem that we're a bit caught in a trap about what a strong leader is. I mean, I remember a book I read like 15, 20 years ago called The Myth of the Strong Leader by Archie Brown. I don't know if any of you know it, but if you know it, if you're interested, I'll send you a link to it afterwards. But I mean, it's all about the fact that at moments of crisis, people tend to feel like they want something that looks like an old-fashioned strong man, because it is usually a strong man, although there are strong women leaders in that sense as well. Obviously, many fewer of them. But there's a sense that that's what you need, as opposed to someone that's prepared to be brave and stand up and say things that they know somebody isn't going to like, but also to reward good behaviour and to find, according to the laws that exist, ways to punish bad behaviour. And I guess the challenge we have is that so much of our leadership is compromised. I mean, what is the status of, a British leader talking about, saying, to the Saudis that we must stop bombing Yemen, when exactly as just discussed, where, who's making money out of that business that produces the weapons that rain down on the Yemeni people. So I mean, the hypocrisy that exists at that level, of course, makes it very challenging. So then we come back to this question: but how can we give people a choice of leaders to elect that would provide this kind of leadership, as opposed to this much more kind of hollow thing that looks strong because it says very strong things, but isn't really strong in terms of building the fabric of society. So I mean, I wonder what you think about the trends that lead people to do that, and how we could, what else can be done to encourage, both for people to rise and to seek power, political power, in a more responsible way. The thing that philosophers have been looking at since the time of Plato. What else can we do to encourage that and promote that? Any of you?
Okay. Listen, in Europe we are not in a very optimistic situation. If you look at the recent elections in different European countries, if you look at the perspective of the European elections, it's not an optimistic view, isn't it? You saw what happened in Holland, the shock. What happens what will happen in Germany at the end of the year, when you have the extreme right party going up, very much up. We have it here, not so much in the French-speaking part of Belgium, but in the Flemish part of Belgium. So and in France, what's going to happen in France? One of the founders with Belgium and others of the European Union. So we are in a difficult and challenging situation, to answer your question. My hope, because we need to have hope, is that out of this bleak period, which will be bleak, we have to know it, because these people are also these extreme right people who are so successful, actually, are not fighters for global warming. They are not going to be at the forefront of the fighting the global warming. They are the problem of immigration and the relation in our countries with Muslim communities don't look so positive. The same goes, and it's one of the main topics for these parties to say we are fighting Muslim immigration, blah, 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 and the Muslim communities and so on and so forth. So we need to prepare. It will take time. I'm sorry to say this.
Bah oui, time. For sure. Amr, you want to add anything?
Yeah, perhaps not directly to your question, Antonia, but what we are seeing also happening in Europe is there's this kind of a trend of stifling freedom of expression. If you are voicing certain ideas about what a large portion of the community feels is the right and just solution for a conflict, for instance, in Palestine, then there are legal repercussions now. I mean, UK is not in a good space right now. They're going after protester, not only perhaps for Palestine, but also look at Stop Oil now. Just by being marched, they are being arrested. And also certain communities are being vilified. Islamophobia is on the rise, and also going after the LGBT community. So there is a need for this intersectionality, and I think one of the failure of perhaps movement or civil society, despite the great role they are playing here and overseas, is this failure of maybe lack of coordination and working together. I think a couple of weeks ago there was a big march in Amsterdam, and there were divergence of views on, okay, shall we speak about justice in general, or shall we speak about climate justice? And there was, going after each other. But it's the same. We also spoke about gender equality and empowerment. The system that enables patriarchy is the system that propels capitalism and also propels military weaponization of our society and abroad. So all those causes needs to be approached from a human rights and justice view. I think in Palestine there is even if it's a great initiative, and people in Gaza are saying there's definitely, since we don't like Hamas, then there's definitely people in Israel who don't support Netanyahu or the far right or any bad ideology that seeks to exterminate other people. So there are definitely these communities, but also so unfair to put the blame or the whole burden of generating based on those endangered community, because there are repercussions. Right. If I stood up in Gaza and say I don't want Hamas, they're like I'm gone and my family. The same in Israel. So I think there need to first coordination, working together, pressure on our leaders, and I think here we have the privilege or the advantage that we can speak up. There are representatives between brackets that you can write to. There are mobilization, there are protests, take to streets, there are all those issues, and then that will hopefully foster the new generation of the right leadership, and at the same time find a way to link grassroots initiatives to the national level. And that's not only a problem in Palestine, but definitely in Yemen. And I speak on experience from Yemen. I work for the UN Office of the Special Envoy on inclusion. There are great ideas to end the war yesterday, not tomorrow, in Yemen, by women-led group, by youth-led group. And they're all written, and there are a huge number of consultations. They are tested, and we all know there is an evidence base that peace is sustainable only when it's inclusive. Yet it doesn't filter through to the national level for all the reason, is the UN needs reform. The international community can't pressure Saudi for obvious reason. Failure of the national government, the internationally recognized government in Yemen, all those kind of factors. So again, one holistic approach that touch upon all the levers of power and influence is necessary, and most importantly, perhaps first and foremost, is recognizing that what we demand from civil society might cost them their lives as well. Here, like I am one of those once I saw a few of my friends going into jail, and actually they went to jail in 2013 and they haven't emerged yet. I was the first one to not go home for 4 years. So it's great that we do empowerment, localization, all this kind of thing, but just realizing that the protection and survival of grassroots organization is at stake.
All right.
We're seeing
two things. We have 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and we're going to do a wrap up of just centering, but we can't let Yetta not speak. So go ahead, Yetta.
No, it's just, I think that this last round, so I'm from Kosovo, so I've been unfortunate enough like you to experience war. And I have been working with the civil society, women, and especially post-war, and I think this is you were saying 99% of people do not want war. And it's mostly we end up with these, messianic leaders with the wrong values perpetuating the situation. And this has been going on for many years. And then we have women who end up picking up the slack and being part of civil society. I was part of that civil society, also working on documenting war crimes at a time where you have a prime minister who is pretty much like you're endangered by the fact of doing that. And I just wonder how do we, and then you mentioned UN, it came as a peace builder and it just sort of went on supporting the wrong leaders for a very long time. Holding, civil society hostage from what they could have sort of brought about, and even the youth, especially. So all of this is kind of is part of, and then you say in terms of interventions, I wouldn't be here if NATO didn't intervene. Do I believe so there's so many kind of things that are connected, and it's very difficult. But the more I work on understanding different ways of leading, for me it comes down to how do we stop these narcissistic leaders in our societies coming to power, because everything else becomes obsolete, regardless how well driven we are, how hopeful we are, and we are held hostage by people who don't understand empathy. And we want to talk to them, but we need to almost, all of us and children, to have this education of understanding, to basically, to call out early on these wrong people without empathy who end up, and we have a system who supports them. So, this is the
I'll be very brief. I want to differ with you, Sandra. It's not true that 90% of people in protracted conflict want peace. It's not true. You have part of the people, the population, who doesn't want peace. They want power, and they want they want the other to be expelled, and they want. So the best objective allies in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict since more than 30 years are the settlers movement, which is a government actually in Israel, and the Hamas. Each time that there was a possibility of trying something after Oslo, immediately the Prime Minister of Israel was killed and by an extremist, a Jewish extremist, and Hamas developed its campaign of suicide bombing everywhere within Israel. So every time the best objective allies are the 40, 30, 20, 40% on each side who don't want peace, who want to use their population in order to move on with their strategy and not wanting peace. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. On that note, we're going to have to come to a close on this conversation on peace and conflict and our common humanity. We started our time together with just centering, and we thought that it would be good to end this conversation for now with another centering. And we wanted to give, first of all, as a gift to you, do whatever you want with it, but we wanted to read you a poem by a poet many of you know, of course, called Rumi. And we just wanted to plant this idea in your soul and in your mind. And if you want to close your eyes while I read it to you, and maybe think from everything we've talked about, and everything was, I feel like talking to all of you 1,000 more hours because it's so like, oh my God, we brought up so many topics, and there's so many facets to reality and peace and war and anyway. But at least to come out of here with our thinking to ourselves, just, is there anything that I can bring to a part of peace, a piece of peace in the world that would both or either help me feel better and or might bring something of value to another human being on the planet. And so let's just think about that. I'm going to keep my eyes open because I have to read the poem, but please close your eyes if you want and really think, what can I bring to peace? What's my piece for peace? Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Peace be with you, as they say. Yeah. Thank you to Ahmed, Simone, Antonia.